All right, moving on into Chapter 7, which is interviewing candidates. And in my honest opinion, this is probably one of the most important chapters we're going to cover throughout the entire class. It may be one of the shortest, but I really want you guys to pay very close attention to this chapter more than anything else. For the simple fact of no matter what type of management you go into, this is still going to apply. It doesn't matter if you're in HR management, if you're in retail management, gas station management, restaurant management. At some point, you're going to have to interview candidates. This in some industries, this is the only step in the process. It's simply along the lines of you interview the person, then you hire the person. So this is the only step that you have to ultimately be able to tell whether this person that you're interviewing is going to be a good candidate for your organization or for the job that you're trying to fill. So like I said, this may be one of the shortest chapters, but in my opinion, this is one of the most important. So, some of the things we're going to cover. The first one is list and give examples of the main types of selection interviews, followed by list and explain the main errors that can undermine an interview's usefulness. Number 3 is define a structured situational interview and give examples of situational questions, behavioral questions, and background questions that provide structure. And then finally, number 4, what are the main points to know about developing and extending the actual job offer? So, moving right into the first one, list and give examples of the main types of selection interviews. We have two basic types whenever we're going into an interview. And all it really has to do with how prepared you are and how prepared you want to be. And that is a structured interview versus an unstructured interview. A structured interview is just like it sounds. You already have a very detailed plan in place before you actually even start the interview. You know the questions you're going to ask. You're going to know how you're going to follow up with people. You know the reactions that you're looking for. On the opposing side is an unstructured interview. And that is one that you ask questions based on the things that come to your head as you're giving the interview. Different jobs will have different levels of which one you actually want to go to. Usually, in best case scenario, you have a structured interview in place, but at the same time, you leave yourself the availability to ask additional questions as the applicant answers the original question. That way, you have a basis to go on, because a lot of times whenever you have an unstructured interview, you ask different questions from every person that you interview. So how are you supposed to compare these people together if you never ask them the same questions? And there's a lot of other things whenever you're doing unstructured interviews that can get in the way. If you are irritated for whatever reason, you're going to cut the interview short. Or you get a bad first impression of somebody, you're also going to cut it short. But at the same time, if you like the applicant personally, you may just sit there and talk for an hour, never actually get into the meat of an actual interview. So it really changes how you want to approach and what qualities you're looking for. If you're looking for somebody that's more personable, maybe it may be all right to go with a less structured approach. During an interview, there are several different types of questions that you could ask. The first one is situational. We talked about this in the last chapter, but a situational question is you as the interviewer give the candidate a situation and ask how they would respond. Say if you were hiring for a leadership position, you ask the person, if a person called off 5 times in a month, how would you handle it? That type of situation that gives a person the understanding of what is expected and how would you respond. The next one is a behavioral question, which is very similar to a situational question, except that it has already happened. Situational is tell me what you would do, and behavioral is tell me what you have already done. Tell me about a time that a customer was irate to you. Tell me about a time that you ran into a problem and how did you fix it. So situational is looking forward, behavioral is looking back. You could also ask job-related questions. Depending on the type of position that you're looking at, you could ask them things specifically about the type of job. If you're asking about an IT job, you're going to ask computer questions. If you're asking about a sales position, you're going to ask them about the sales process or things like that. Obviously, the more technical in nature, the more job-related questions you're going to get. If it's computers or if it's engineering, you can ask very specific questions about that job to make sure the person actually knows what they're talking about and didn't just go get a degree that they don't even understand. The next one is stress, and that may not necessarily be a question, but there are certain ways to stress a candidate to see how they handle under pressure. Take, for instance, you could ask them a rude question just to see whether they get irritated, whether they get mad. Another popular one that I've seen in the past is you have very long interviews. Even myself, I've been on an interview that lasted for 5 or 6 hours at a time just to see how someone would respond after that amount of time. It was a series of interviews, one right after another, to see whether you held your composure together, to see how you dealt with that certain level of stress. And then finally, there's also puzzle questions. This could be unrelated to the job, but it still could be appropriate. Sort of like whenever you're giving a game to a child. You want them to solve a problem. You give them something to solve and see how they handle it. Oftentimes, this isn't directly related to the job, but you want to see how a person's going to solve a problem or how they'll go about approaching a problem. They may not be able to find the answer, but they had a good approach to how they wanted to solve it. And that's ultimately what you're looking for. There are also different ways that we can give an interview. The first one is considered a panel interview. And a panel interview is nothing more than multiple people giving an interview. Most of us are very familiar with the one-on-one interview, where one person sits down with a person directly across from them and has a traditional interview. A panel interview is you'll have multiple people interviewing the same person or multiple people interviewing multiple people. And this is a very different approach that is becoming more popular just because different people are going to have different questions they need to ask. Obviously, if you were an HR manager, you're going to have very different questions than the direct supervisor is going to. Or maybe you want to see how people respond whenever they have 5 people sitting in front of them. These type of things, they come in very handy to do a panel interview where you can get a bunch of people asking questions all at the same time. Another variation of a panel interview is a sequential interview, where basically a candidate sits down with one person. As soon as they're done with that one person, they move directly to the next. As soon as they're done with them, they move directly to the next. So instead of interviewing with 5 people at one time, they do 5 people one right after another. Another type of way of administering an interview is a phone interview. And because a lot of times, depending on the type of job we're hiring for, we often try to get candidates from all over the country or all over the world. It doesn't make sense to pull everybody in for an interview, if we're not even sure, or even if we're not even slightly positive we're going to hire them, it becomes very expensive if we were to pull in everybody before we've even had a chance to talk to them. So what we do is instead we use one of the next two, which is either a phone interview or a video web assisted interview, where instead of someone traveling to your office and sitting down with you, they can sit at their home or their office and have a conversation with you over the phone or via web chat. Video and web assisted are becoming even more popular because most phones have cameras on them, most computers have cameras on them, so they just utilize that technology that's already there to put people face to face with each other, even though there's a computer between them. So that goes with the computerized as well. The next one down is something that's very, very new. A Second Life interview isn't very widely known, but it is basically you create an avatar on the internet, just as though you're playing a video game. It's a representation of who you are, and you do an interview that way. So it's a lot more computerized than anything else, and a lot of times you still don't see the person face to face like you would on a video, but you just have a conversation and you see a representation or a picture of what that person thinks they look like. There's also another type, which is considered the speed dating approach. If you were to be hiring a bunch of candidates or interviewing a bunch of candidates, you could gather them all together into a room, and you use what is very similar to speed dating, where you sit down with the person and say, you have 10 minutes to prove to me that you're the best person for the job, go. And that person does their best in order to figure out what you're looking for and how to best to represent themselves. They have 10 minutes, they get up, they move on, the next person sits down. They have 10 minutes, that person gets up, moves on, the next person. So it's very fast, very moving, and it gets people very straight to the point, and doesn't allow people to sit back and relax. And then finally, a case interview, which is very similar to the situations that we talked about before, the situational questions, where you have an interviewee that you give an entire problem and said, fix this problem. If it's a leadership job, maybe it's a leadership problem. They give an entire paper describing the situation and say, okay, what would you do? So, one of the things that's in the book, you could read a little bit more about this, but HR is a profit center. Great Western Bank uses a computerized job interview system, which allows them to interview a lot of people a lot quicker and a lot easier. They use a lot of different steps along the way. The first one that they use is a candidate responds via a touchscreen and a microphone. Instead of actually sitting down with a manager, they sit down, it's pretty much a kiosk, with a touchscreen. They push start interview, and then the kiosk will ask them a question, and the person just answers the question into the microphone, and it records their answers. And then whenever the manager is ready, they can go back through and watch all those recordings. This allows the manager a lot more freedom to review people's information when it's more convenient, and it doesn't require that face-to-face interview. And it also allows a lot of people to be doing it at one time. If you have 5 kiosks set up, you can have 5 people giving their answers all at the same time without having to have a manager in front of every one of them. The next thing that they did was applicants can see what the job is really like. Maybe after they asked and answered all the questions, the kiosk can then play a video of this is the work environment, this is what the people do, these are the types of tasks that you'll be completing throughout the day. So they use a lot of multimedia. Because the person is already sitting in front of a computer screen, you can show them information too. The next one is those hired had reportedly 26% less likely to leave within 90 days. Because the people already knew what to expect, especially whenever they've seen where they would be working. If the person was applying for a factory job, they'd play a video of what the factory environment was like. If the person didn't like that environment, they just wouldn't accept the job, which is a lot cheaper than if they accepted the job and left immediately after. So with giving them that information, 26% less turnover, which if there's less turnover, it's less costly because you don't have to go through all this process again. Okay, 3 ways to make interviews useful. The first one is structure the interview. And this is one of the most key points that I push on a lot of people is structure the interview. That way you know exactly what you need to ask. You're not making it up as you go. This becomes especially handy if there's any lag during the interview. Sometimes you sit down with people that they're not comfortable, you're not comfortable, and it just turns into an awkward conversation for an hour and you never really got to any point. Or maybe you like the person a lot and you just sit there and chat for an hour, but you never actually got to any real meat and potatoes questions. If you structure the interview, you know exactly what questions you need to ask, and so that you can actually give a good interview and that every interview is going to be the same. The next thing is carefully select traits to assess. Before you even start the interview, you should know what you're interviewing for. We talked about the job analysis before, but we need to make sure that we're only asking for the traits that we really need. What are most important? If we wanted to cover every trait for every job that this person might have, we'll be there for days on top of days just trying to ask a bunch of questions. Select the most important ones and focus on those. And then finally, beware of committing interview errors. And we're going to be talking about those in the next section, but we have a lot of errors that we do as human beings, as hiring managers, that it's best if we try to avoid them, mainly by knowing that they're there. And as soon as we know that they're there, we can try to figure out a way to get around them. So, quick review, structured versus unstructured interviews. One is prepared, one is not, and depending on the type of job will depend on what type is most appropriate. Some of the questions you can ask are situational, which is what would you do? Behavioral is what have you done? Job related, which is about the job to make sure the person understands it. Stress related, which is intentionally put the person under stress to see how they react. And then also puzzle questions just to figure out how their brain works. And we also have several different types of ways to administer the interview. The one that they don't list on here is obviously one-on-one. Then you also have your panel interview, which is multiple people giving an interview. You have a phone interview, which is just like it sounds. You interview somebody over the phone instead of in person. And then several various technology-based where you can use a computer or use the camera on a phone in order to give an interview with people. List and explain the main errors that can undermine an interview's usefulness. Like I said, one of the best ways to give a good interview is to avoid errors. Some of the errors that we as human beings are known for and can affect how we give an interview. The first one is snap judgments. Typically, as we're very prone to, as soon as we see somebody, we instantly make a judgment about them. Whether it's good or bad can affect the entire remainder of the interview. If somebody walks in and maybe their shoelace is untied, and your immediate response is that the person doesn't pay attention to what they're doing, that's going to affect every other question you ask from that point forward. If something doesn't fit right, you may change your entire opinion of them just because of your first impression. We need to make sure that we're not doing this. And this isn't just a physical appearance, but a lot of things that we do. Maybe we don't like how the person sits, or we don't like the portfolio that they put in front of you. There's a lot of things that we need to make sure that we understand. That way we don't try to use it against them or use it for them. If a person is very friendly and personable, but they know nothing about the job, is that the right person for that job? Another error that undermines an interview is job requirements are not clear. If we don't have a very clear understanding of what we're hiring for, we don't have a clear way of figuring out whether the person fits the job. So we talked about the job description and everything like that in a previous chapter. We need to make sure that we're very clear on the position we're hiring for. That way we can be sure we're hiring the right person and asking the right questions. The next one is candidate order and pressure to hire. Throughout the day, people respond differently. Say you were to have interviews all day long. You're going to feel a lot different first thing in the morning at 9 o'clock in the morning than you are at 4:30 in the afternoon. So these could be the exact same people interviewing at both those times, but they're going to get different responses because maybe after lunch you're tired, you don't want to talk to anybody, so you're a little grumpy because you have to. Make sure that you know that's your own personal thing. Don't reflect it on the person sitting in front of you. So you can know that the order people do it, that, and a lot of times people remember the last person they talked to, but not so much the first person they talked to. If you were to interview people all day long and you're trying to make a decision before the end of the day, the last 2 or 3 people that you talked to may be all you remember. So is that person that came up first actually still going to have a chance to get the job? Maybe, maybe not. So the order that you give people ultimately matters. The next part of that was pressure to hire. Do we need to hire somebody right now, or can it wait? This will change how we see people. If we need to hire somebody, we're already short-handed, we need to get stuff done, we need to get stuff moving, we're going to be more likely to favor people that might not be the best for the job. Now, if we have a lot of time, we don't have to worry about how fast we get somebody in, we're going to be much more strict on what we're doing. We may turn down every applicant because we don't need somebody right now. But if we need somebody right now, we may hire the first person that walks in the door. The next part is nonverbal behavior and impression management. This is one of those things that body language is one of the most important things. They say that 90% of what somebody says doesn't come out of their mouth. It's how the person sits. It's how the person acts when they're around other people. The tone in their voice, how they're presenting themselves. All these nonverbal cues can show a lot into people, but don't read into them too much. Especially during an interview process. Just because somebody is nervous during an interview doesn't mean they're a nervous person. A lot of interviews are very high-stress situations, so the person's going to act that way too. But we also have what's called impression management, where some people are aware of what they're doing and how they're acting. If they know that they really want a job, they're going to put a smile on their face, whether they're happy or not. And we have to understand that there are people that can do this. If you're going in for a sales position, they want a happy-go-lucky person. Whether you're happy-go-lucky or not, you're going to act like that because you know that's what's expected of you. So be very careful about what you see, how you act on both sides of the table, and also be aware that people are adjusting their behavior to the situation. The next one is personal characteristics, which, like we talked about before, some personal characteristics are illegal to judge people on, whether it be gender, race, religion, age. These are all characteristics of the person. We have to be very, very careful, not only from the legal side, but just for the side of right. Just because we have an idea of what somebody's like doesn't mean that's actually true. So we want to stay away from personal characteristics that may change what we're thinking and be knowledgeable that we have these thoughts so we can try to avoid them. And then also interviewer mistakes. None of us are perfect. Whether we're giving the interview or receiving the interview, we're going to make mistakes. So as an interviewer, sometimes you may make a favorable pre-interview impression. Maybe you just like somebody based on their resume and they went to the same college as you or something like that. You're going to give them a better chance than anybody else. Does that mean that they should have? No, maybe not. Also, maybe asking the wrong questions. If you're asking questions about a different job, are you hiring the right person for that job? Maybe you're asking irrelevant questions or questions that really don't matter. We need to make sure that we're not perfect, and we need to try to figure out ways to get around our own imperfections. All right, we're going to skip over this because a lot of the context is in the book for this. All right, so the next section is define a structured situational interview and give examples of situational questions, behavioral questions, and background questions that provide structure. How to design and conduct an effective interview. And like I said, this is very important that we're able to put this together in absolutely any type of job we have. If we're going to be in charge of anybody, more than likely we're also going to be interviewing people. All right, so to design and construct an effective interview, the first step is analyzing the job. Like we said multiple times over several of the last chapters, we need to have a very clear understanding of what the job is and what the perfect candidate is required to be able to accomplish it. So we're going to spend a lot of time just reviewing the job to make sure we completely understand it. The next thing we do is rate the main duties of the job. If we have the main duties down, then we can design our interview around those duties. If the person is a leader, we're going to ask leadership questions. If the person is a designer, we're going to ask creative questions. If the person is a factory worker, we're going to ask questions about structure and patterns and stuff like that. The next thing we do after we've figured out what the main jobs are, we create the questions based on those duties. If you're applying or you're interviewing somebody for a leadership position, you ask questions about leadership. Tell me about a time that you led a group to success, or what would you do if one of your employees stopped showing up to work? Stuff like that. You design the questions about what the person's going to need to do in the job. The next one is create benchmark answers. So these are going to be your perfect answers to the questions. If you ask say the question about, tell me about a time that you led somebody to success. In your mind, you need to know what you're looking for as an answer. And basically what you do after that point, once the person gives you their answer, you compare the two together. Was theirs more right than yours? Was theirs wrong compared to yours? Was even what you were looking for? A benchmark just gives you a place to go by to see how well the person did. And then finally, the fifth one is appoint interview panel and conduct the interviews. Sometimes it will do the panel interview. Sometimes it'll be one-on-one. But if it's a panel interview, you need to know who's asking what questions. That way, the same person isn't trying to ask the same question as somebody else, or something doesn't get missed because it wasn't assigned to somebody. And then also the last part is actually give the interview. And I'll tell you, after you give an interview or two, you're probably going to take a step back, readjust the interview process, and then do it again. Because maybe this was a dumb question. Why are we asking this? Or this question was worded wrong and we weren't getting the answers we were looking for. That type of thing. Just readjust it to make sure it fits what you're actually needing to do. All right, so this is pretty much the exact same thing. The only addition, this is actually adds a little bit. The first one is know your job, which is the analyze process. Structure the interview, which is create the questions. Third is get organized, which is basically the same thing. The fourth one that most people forget about is establish rapport. And basically, you should, whenever you have an interview with somebody, it should be a conversation. Two-directional, people talking amongst themselves to get people to feel more comfortable, to get the answers that you're looking for, and to be able to tell whether the person themselves is who they think or who they're presenting. Like I said, a lot of people can put on a good face to say that they're the best person for the job, but you develop a relationship with them and you'll be able to tell whether that's the real person or not. So as an interviewer, it's kind of your job to try to warm the person up a little bit to get the truth out of them. And then number 5 is ask questions, which is standard, last step of the process, and then take brief notes. It says specifically brief notes here. You don't want to be writing word for word what the person is saying, just because it will make the interviewee, it will make them feel uncomfortable. If you're face down in a notebook the entire time that they're talking, they're going to think you're not paying attention to them. It's going to make them feel uncomfortable. Take notes, just brief bullet points. Just don't try to say word for word, and also don't take none. You should always have a piece of paper in front of you. That way you can write something down. It will show the interviewee, the person you're interviewing, that you actually care and that you're going to remember the conversation that you're having if you're writing stuff down as you go. And then finally, close the interview. This is more etiquette than anything else. Make sure that you thank the person, let them know that the interview is over. Sometimes if an interviewer is uncomfortable, they just get up and leave. That interviewee, are they supposed to leave too? Are they supposed to sit there and wait? They don't know. They're the ones that are supposed to be being told what to do. And then finally, after the interview, go back and review what you went over. Review the answers. Make sure you understood everything that they said. Oftentimes, we give an interview, we write stuff down. By the time a half hour to an hour passes, we've already forgotten what they said. Review it to make sure we understood everything that was happening. Talent management, profiles and employee interviews. What we can do is whenever we're developing our interview process, we should be creating profiles, which, like we said, the competencies, traits, knowledge, and experience for creating the interviews. We should have a good understanding of what all is involved That way we can test people correctly, train people correctly, appraise them on how well they're doing, and then also finally pay them. But whenever it comes to the interviews, we should be doing this not only when we're hiring people, but also people that are in our organization. That way we know that everything is lined up with each other. So we went over briefly a job analysis, but like I said, this is what we've been going over for a couple chapters now. We talked about rating somebody in regards to setting a benchmark of what we expect somebody to answer with what they actually do. Creating benchmarking answers was also set up what we're looking for, and also creating a panel and conducting interviews. So, what are the main points to know about developing and extending the actual job offer? After they've gone through the interviews, they've gone through all the tests, now at some point we're going to have to offer somebody a job. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend them a job offer. This isn't in writing yet most of the time. Sometimes it'll be a phone call, sometimes it will be an email. And what it will do is they'll say, this is what we're willing to pay you. This is the benefits you're going to get. And this is actually the job title. This is the duties that you would be expected to do if you accept. A lot of times this is over a phone call. Sometimes, like I said, it's an email, so it's a little bit more formal, but not entirely. At this point, it's open to some negotiation. Depending on the level of the job, you're more than willing to, from the interviewee side, is to negotiate salary and benefits, but also from the employer side, make sure that you understand that people are going to try to get something more or get something that they feel is comfortable. Just because somebody negotiates a job offer does not mean that they're not interested in a job. It is not a bad thing whenever somebody tries to negotiate, say, a pay rate or benefits that are offered. It's just them trying to get the most out of their job. But after negotiations are over, whenever everybody agrees on the pay rate, the terms, everything else, an actual written job offer is usually extended. This could also be an attachment to an email that they print out, sign, and send back. This could be something they send in the mail. Sometimes this is even over an email that they say, just reply back that you agree to these terms. But for the most legal, appropriate way, it should be a piece of paper that is signed. That way everybody knows that negotiations are over. These are the terms that we have agreed to, and this is what's going to happen moving forward. At this point, then they would actually start scheduling when's the first day, what arrangements do we have to make. Issues to consider with the written offer. This is after they've agreed and everything, that piece of paper that you want them to sign or agree to. This is things that you should have on there. The first one is a welcome sentence. This is more courtesy than anything else, but it's basically just saying, welcome to the company, here's our job offer, we look forward to working with you, something like that. In the job offer, it will absolutely have pay information. Just because if you're not getting paid, you're not going to be working. This is the key point that a lot of people need to have in any job offer, is the pay information. Next to that is also the benefits information. Do you get health care to go with it? Do you get paid time off? Do you get holidays? Things like that. All of that should be listed. That way there's no surprises to people whenever they start. Which also goes down to the next one, is paid leave information. And also, finally, the terms of employment. Most states will give you a at-will type of employment. Basically, that says that at any time, for whatever reason, whether there is a reason or not, you can leave and they can have you leave. That's an at-will relationship, and most jobs that you're going to encounter will be like that. Some of them are contract based and are not at will, so there's differences at that, but it should be listed in the terms of employment. This is a contract position, or this is an at will position. So the employment contract, just like I said, sometimes most jobs that we get are strictly, here's a job, until something else happens, we expect you to stay here forever. That type of thing, where it doesn't expire, nothing ever happens after a certain period of time. You just work until one of us says we don't anymore. Whereas a contract is usually a little bit different. The first one is oftentimes it includes a duration. If you think about any sports star, they have contracts, and every contract says that you're bound by this contract for 3 years or 5 years. In general employment, this happens the same way. If you become a CEO of a company, you may get a contract that says you're on contract for 3 years. That means that after 3 years, we can either renegotiate or we can go our separate ways. Severance provisions, for whatever reason, if this contract doesn't work out and we need to go our separate ways early, how are we going to do that? Are you going to get your full pay? Do you only get paid up to the point that you've already worked towards? What's going to happen if we need to split ties early? The next one is non-disclosure requirements. Non-disclosure is basically saying that you can't give away secret information to a new employer, or you can't use this against us. Take, for instance, if you work for Bush's Baked Beans. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the commercials about they have their secret recipe that nobody's allowed to have. They would have all of their employees that have a non-disclosure agreement that says you're not allowed to tell anybody what's in our baked beans. A lot of contract positions are a lot the same way. If you're the CEO of a company, you're obviously going to have access to secrets that nobody else is supposed to know. You can't just terminate a contract, go to another company, and use those secrets against the original company, because that would be unlawful. So a lot of companies make you sign a non-disclosure before you even start to make sure that these secrets aren't going to get out. And then also, finally, covenants not to compete. This is basically saying that if you were to leave this company for whatever reason, you're not going to become a direct competitor. Or you can't have two jobs that compete against each other for whatever reason. These are especially important if you're traveling within the same industry. Take, for instance, if you were the CEO of a casino, and you worked for that casino for a couple years, the contract expires and you move on. It's to say that you can't go to the casino that's right down the street and work for them now, because you know things about the competition that other people don't. It would say that you're not allowed to work within so many miles of the first casino, things like that. That way you don't go from being an asset with the company to being direct competition against it. All right, so just a quick review over contracts and job offers. Just as a job offer includes pay rates, benefits, and job duties, the letter of employment will also include these. So just make sure you always want to list these things. That way there's no question about what somebody's getting paid or no assumptions. It's all right there on the paper. There's no question about it. And the employment contract will include, this one says terms of 3 years, but they usually have a duration. You very rarely have a contract that will go on forever, because then it's just regular employment at that point. All right, so that is the end of Chapter 7. Like I said, I really hope you guys got something out of this, because no matter what job you go into moving forward, interviewing is going to be one of the most key roles to doing it the best that you can. All right, see you guys in Chapter 8.